Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenborough, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Arsenal but bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Jordan Ayew and Milivojevic after the game. So let's begin. Roy Hodgson's side fought back from 2 goals down to earn a well-deserved and impressive 2-2 draw against Arsenal on Sunday afternoon. Despite Palace finding themselves 2-0 down after 9 minutes, it was Roy Hodgson's side who had the first chance of the game. On 4 minutes, Andros Townsend created a well-worked opening down the right flank and floated the ball to the edge of the box, where he found the late arriving James McArthur. Despite a good connection from 18 yards, McArthur's header went straight at the keeper. 5 minutes later, from 2 very similar corners via Nicolas Pepe, Sokratis and David Luiz fired past Wayne Hennessy in quick succession to stun the Eagles. And things almost worsened for Palace on 11 minutes, with a Kieran Tony cross finding Andre Lacazette in the centre of the Palace goal from 14 yards. The Arsenal striker controlled with his chest before firing a low arrowed effort into the bottom left corner. However, Hennessy got down well to save from the forward. From a Palace corner on 14 minutes, Matteo Guendouzi's long ball clearance put Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang clean through. However, a lung-busting run across from right-back from Joe Ward saw the full-back get back to put the Gunners striker off, with Aubameyang scuffing wide. The next 15 minutes saw Hodgson's side grow more and more into the game, and the chance to half the deficit arrived on 30 minutes via the familiar combo of Wilfried Zaha and Luka Milivojevic. A trademark direct and skillful drop into the box from Zaha teased Callum Chambers into making the challenge, with the defender clearly fouling Zaha. However, referee Marky Atkinson initially punished the Eagles player with a yellow card for simulation. Up stepped VAR to reverse the booking and award Palace a chance from 12 yards, which now means Zaha has won the joint most penalties in Premier League history alongside Raheem Sterling and Jamie Vardy on 16. Milivojevic sent the away end into raptures with his 5th goal in 6 Premier League appearances against Arsenal, with 4 of them coming from the spot. It was almost a perfect first half comeback in injury time, with Patrick Van Aanholt popping up inside the box and drawing a smart save from Leno that was a comfortable height for the Arsenal keeper to parry away. Palace exploded out for the second half, with Callum Chambers' yellow card for a foul on Townsend, who was in full flight down the left flank, epitomising Arsenal's struggles. On 52 minutes, the opening spell of dominance in the second half would reap the rewards. Again Palace exploited the left-hand side, this time McArthur surging clear before chipping a delightful ball over Leno and the Arsenal defenders to find Jordan Ayew unmarked and nod home. The Eagles were in the ascendancy, and on the hour mark Zaha led a 3-on-3 attack for Palace. However, after working space for a shot, a retreating Guendouzi got back to block the shot from the Ivory Coast international. It wasn't until the 67th minute that Arsenal registered their first shot on target in the second half, a near post header from Lacazette from a Pepe corner that Hennessy did well to collect low down. As both teams pushed for a winner, Hodgson freshened up the final third, with Christian Benteke replacing Ayew with 10 minutes left. Another typical hard-working and goal-scoring performance from the permanent summer signing. Unfortunately, it looked like it was the Gunners who had found the 5th decisive goal of the game on 83 minutes, with Sokratis getting his 2nd of the game after a goal-mouth scramble from an Arsenal corner. However, VAR was again on the Eagles' side, overriding the strike due to a couple of fouls in the box on Palace players. As Arsenal pushed again for a late winner, Hennessy sprung into action again, reaching the top right corner well from a close-range curled effort from Luiz. As the 4th official signalled 6 minutes injury time, Wilfried Zaha almost made it the dream comeback for Hodgson's side, with yet another exciting drive and run into the box, with his effort inching just the wrong side of Leno's right post. A late Arsenal corner failed to trouble Palace's defensive lines, and in fact sprung a one-on-one counter-attack, Zaha versus Guendouzi. However, a close line from the Arsenal midfielder unlawfully stopped the Palace winger in his tracks. That was the last moment of note in the match, and the Eagles returned to South London with smiles on their faces after a heroic and impressive fight back in North London. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like me who does like to follow both Palace accounts, whether that be on Twitter or Facebook, then of course do head over to the respective sites and follow our accounts at Crystal Palace. Now, like I said in that little introduction, obviously you can follow us for all the latest Palace news, so that's all just your general club news, whether that be about the academy, injury news, stuff about the stadium, all things sort of related to that obviously is in that sort of general bracket. So if you do want a place to get all of that sort of general news, of course follow us on there. But we obviously do supplement that with transfer news, so in particular, even though we're not even in January yet, but there's loads of rumours going on about what could happen, ins and outs in January. So of course, if you do want to keep up to date with all latest transfer news, and like I said, it's both players coming in and out, of course give us a follow on there. And obviously alongside that, we also post interviews as well. So if we find one, maybe with management or with certain players, or even, going back to transfers, certain players' agents, might have something to say. If you're someone who wants to get involved and, read all of these latest interviews and things, obviously do give us a follow, because whenever we find this content, we obviously put it out there for you guys to obviously consume. And obviously, like all Palace accounts, or really all football accounts on Twitter, we obviously keep it up to date with our latest opinions. So of course there's a few of us who run the page, and of course, you're looking at the press conferences, giving our instant reaction to that, who we think will start at the weekend, and of course, during the game, half time, and even after the game, we also give our reaction to things which happen. So of course, if you're someone who wants to get involved in that, wants to also share your opinion, but also read what others are having to say about the game, of course do head over to follow us on our respective sites. Now, obviously a good place for you guys to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, obviously where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10. And obviously the main reason I want you guys to do that is that rather than me just having my opinion of the game, how I rated the players from 1 to 10, I can read your guys' comments, see how you rated the players, and of course we can have a discussion based upon that, because I'm sure there might be a few players, even though it was a good performance, good comeback, there might be a few players you may disagree with. So of course feel free to share that below so I can read through it, see how we obviously compared in terms of how we rated the players. And even if you don't want to do that, comment below with your general views of the game. And even if you're an Arsenal fan, you find yourselves here, comment below with your views, because of course from their perspective they really should be winning a game at home, and they should be winning the game against Palace, being a lower league lower Premier League opposition. Obviously would normally be a lower position, even though we're only one place below them, but normally speaking, we're below Arsenal in the league, so they'll expect to beat us. They've obviously got a lot better players than us. But in the Palace perspective, it was another hard-fought win. Obviously, to be 2-0 down was terrible in the first place. But the fact that we had that grit, that determination to get back into the game with the help of VAR, which I've got to say, a year ago we would have lost that game, maybe 3-1 or so. So the fact that we had VAR there meant the game finished 2-2. And you've got to look at it and go, yes, maybe the second, or the disallowed goal, so the second VAR incident was a bit controversial, but then the first one, that is why VAR is good, because of course it meant that Zaha won that penalty which he rightly deserved. So of course different opinions about the game, different views about players, so anything really that you guys want to share, obviously drop it below. And like I've said, it's not just so that I can read through it, but any other fans who come to the podcast, they can listen to my opinion and also read the comment section as well. Once again, just building up that discussion, build up a more broader opinion. And if there is anything you may disagree with or something you think I've missed, obviously feel free to also comment that below. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned or join our Facebook group, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. So of course before the game there was a little bit of speculation, obviously, that Gaeta and actually Martin Kelly as well, they were the two players who were sort of 50-50 for this game here. They had trained the week prior, but of course still having little niggly sort of knock-ons from their injuries, so it wasn't 100% sure whether they would start the game. So of course it was 50-50 as to whether Hennessy or Gaeta would start this game. Now of course it was Hennessy who started, much to the disappointment of many Palace fans, but you've got to look at his performance, and I've given him a 6 only because there were some good parts of his game and likewise some bad parts of his game. But when you've got someone like Hennessy who's more than capable to debutise every so often, we don't want to carry on with him in goal, no discredit to him, but obviously Gaeta is evidently better. But the fact that Hennessy continued in the side, done what he had to do in the absence of Gaeta, was good to see. Now, I've given him a 6 overall because, like I said, other than the goals, I think he made a fair few good saves, and particularly towards the end of the game when it was 2-2, to actually keep us in the game, he made these really crucial saves, and that's something I talk week in, week out about Gaeta's performances, so it's nice to see actually Hennessy as well stepping up to the plate, making these important saves. Now obviously in terms of the goals we conceded, obviously the first one absolutely diabolical, and the second one more or less exactly the same caller, as much diabolical as the first one. Now in terms of that, just looking at the first goal, you know, obviously some people would say, oh, Hennessy couldn't do much about that. Now he couldn't do much about that because his positioning was so bad in the first place, because he literally, the box is crowded, he's tried to punch a ball that he was never ever going to have any chance of getting, gone to punch it, completely missed it, obviously, dived to the ground, he's on the ground, and by the time he's got up, the ball's already gone past him, going into their net. And of course there were players on the line who maybe should have done better, but Hennessy couldn't do much about that Arsenal goal because he was on the floor from his mistake he made, like, you know, 20 seconds earlier on by trying to jump for a ball that he wasn't going to get. So in terms of saying he couldn't do much about it, it's because of his earlier mistake. But the thing I've got to say is that when you make a mistake like that, where you've made yourself look like a complete idiot by trying to punch a ball, try and catch a ball that you're never going to get, he didn't let that get to him. Even when we conceded the second goal after that, very similar, very poor corner, but he didn't let that get the better of him. And actually, as the game went on, like I said, with the good important saves he made, he obviously got better as the game went on. And that's something we've seen previously with we haven't seen previously with Hennessy, where, you know, you're looking under the Pardew era in particular, you know, Hennessy would drop a clanger and then his confidence would be gone for obviously the game, but obviously for weeks after that. So the fact that he made these little mistakes at the beginning of the game but got better as the game went on was really good to see. Now, like I've said, that first corner is really unforgivable. You're never going to catch that ball or punch it even, and because the box is so crowded, just stay on your line. And he may have had a chance to get it, but because he was on the ground, you couldn't really get there. But then you've also got to look at it and go, actually, because Hennessy was on the ground, you've then got to rely on your defenders, and because they had loads of opportunities to clear the ball but didn't, you've also got to look at it and go, actually, Hennessy should have done better there. Now, one thing I did like about his performance, and obviously it's not good to have people time wasting, but, you know, Hennessy took his time with the ball, made good decisions in terms of who to play the ball out to, whether to punt it long or not, and that's what you've got to do against Arsenal, because you give away possession, Arsenal on the counter-attack can punish you. So the fact that he took his time on the ball, made the right decisions, was of course good to see. And I suppose, you know, realistically it was a very intense match, and he was able to take the sting out of that in terms of, you know, just slowing the game down, playing the ball out from the back, obviously making these good saves as well, and that's what you want to see from a keeper. So it was nice to see him actually be able to do that. And of course the one save in particular really for me that stands out is the one from Lacazette, you know, at his near post, Hennessy gets down low. Superb save to obviously keep us in the game. So you're looking at his performance overall. You know, he started the game relatively badly. You know, any goalkeeper conceding 2 in 10 minutes is obviously bad, but the fact that he rose above that and obviously made these saves towards the end of the game to keep us in the game is why I was impressed with his performance, and that's why I think he deserves the 6 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our back four, and that is of course the right back Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of Ward's performance, you know, there isn't really too much to talk about, just because he'd done what he had to do for the team and just put in a really sort of hard-working performance, which, you know, that's what you expect from players, particularly when you're up against a quality of an opposition like Arsenal. So the fact that he just done his job is why I've given him that 6 overall. Now, obviously in terms of his overall impact on the game, he didn't really have much impact on the game, and like I've said, that's because he was just going about his game, doing the basics of marking and, you know, defensive sides in particular, just doing these simple things right. And, you know, that's what you want to see from players. You know, if they're not going to have lots of impact on the game, as long as they do the basics right and they do them to a good enough standard, that's what you want to see, and that's what I really was great to see. Now, there obviously was one moment in particular which really stood out for me. Obviously, that's when Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, I think it was a ball over the top, ran straight through on goal. Arguably, you know, if it wasn't for Joe Ward running across, that would have been, I think it would have been 3-0 at that point. So the fact that Joe Ward, even though he's obviously playing at right back, he sprinted into the centre of the field, managed to sort of put off Aubameyang so much that he actually hit his shot, and he obviously went out for a goal kick. Really just goes to show, you know, obviously he's not the fastest player, but just that determination that Ward had to make sure he could do whatever he could to obviously chase down Aubameyang and then of course put him off. And, you know, obviously Aubameyang, if it wasn't for Ward, probably would have had a clean shot through on goal. And whilst Ward didn't necessarily make the contribution there in terms of making that challenge or making a tackle or winning the ball back, just his sheer presence and chasing down of Aubameyang was enough to put him off. And that's what you want to see, because sometimes it's not about making these heroic tackles. It's just about you know making it difficult for the opposition, and that's exactly what he done there. But like I've said, overall I think a 6 is a fair result, only because his defending was decent, got forward on a few occasions, put a few balls into the box and a few crosses, and yes, nothing came off them, but it was just nice to see him actually do his defensive work, as well as when he had the opportunity to go forward, he actually made an impact there as well. So once again here, Joe Ward, not really much to talk about, but I do think the 6 overall is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the first of our 2 centre-backs, and that is James Tomkins, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now this is one that a few people may disagree with, some people may rate him lower, some people rate him slightly higher, but for me, given sort of the average, and given the fact that he's still coming back from injury, and it was a hard game against quality opposition, I think this 6 overall is a fair result. Now, a phrase that I use quite often to describe players' performances is steady, and that's exactly what his performance was here. Nothing spectacular throughout the game, but he done what he had to do, much like Joe Ward, I suppose, in terms of doing what he has to do defensively, just sort of plodding along, doing the basics right. And that, of course, was great to see. Now, obviously, unlike Joe Ward, Tomkins had a few shaky moments in the game, particularly with the goals we conceded. You've got to look at it and go, we obviously haven't conceded this season from a set piece. So the fact that we just put all of that out the window, that hard work and defensively, and just concede 2 really simple corners, you've got to put a bit of blame on the defenders and go, that was your shaky moment there. You should be dominating that aerial battle and making sure no player gets on the end of a cross from a corner. Obviously we didn't do that, and that was one of Tomkins' shaky moments, and of course other times throughout the game where maybe giving the ball away or not necessarily having that influence he normally would have. And yes, that was the case sometimes with Tomkins, but you're looking towards the end of the game, the fact that we held on and managed to go through the game unscathed in terms of not conceding a late goal to make it 3-2, obviously is why I've given him a 6 overall, because his sort of performance deserved Palace actually getting a point in the end, because whilst he made a few mistakes, just that defensive performance and keeping Arsenal out, they only scored the goals in the first 10 minutes, so for 80 minutes or so, bar the goal that was disallowed, we obviously kept them quiet. So of course you've got to give Tomkins a bit of credit there. But like I've said, I probably could have given him higher, but because he was quite poor for the goals, and at times he didn't seem confident, and I'm going to put that down to the fact that he's come back from injury, still trying to get back to his old self. But what you've got to look at is the fact that he's still done what he had to do, had that steady game by just doing the basics right, and that's what you want to see from a player, and that's why I've given him a 6 overall. And I suppose the final thing really is that this can be seen as a good or bad thing, but loads of times when we were under pressure, he obviously put the ball out for throws and corners, and yes, that's good because you're clearing the danger, but you'd rather just clear the ball upfield and I suppose not give the opposition possession again, or put the ball out from a throw-in, but you at least want to clear the danger up the field. Whereas as we saw, well, I suppose with the whole back four, quite often we were just putting the balls out for throws and corners, and considering the fact that we couldn't defend a corner, obviously we wanted to try and avoid them at all costs. But once again here, James Tomkins, still coming back to full fitness, but this was a step in the right direction. So once again, I do think the 6 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to his centre-back partner, and that is Gary Cahill, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, to be honest, much like what I said with Tomkins, much the same in terms of just being fairly solid at the back, fully deserving of getting the point in terms of keeping Arsenal quiet for 80 minutes or so. And like I said, obviously where I said Tomkins was a little bit shaky, I've given Cahill the 7 as opposed to the 6, and that's just because he was a little bit better than Tomkins, a little bit more assured. Not one of Cahill's best performances in the Palace shirt, but he's still done his shift for the side, was using his experience up against that opposition that Arsenal have, or the attackers Arsenal have. So the fact that he used that experience to obviously to bring it to our benefit was of course good to see. Now obviously, much like Tomkins, the negatives is that on set pieces he was a bit shaky, not getting the right man or not jumping at the right moment, and as we saw with the 2 goals we conceded, 2 simple corners into the box, Cahill and Tomkins should be dominating the air there, clearing the danger. They didn't, was shaky, and of course that's why we conceded. So whilst Cahill's performance was fantastic throughout the whole game, for the most part he was solid, done what he had to do, using his experience, actually it was a little bit disappointing in the fact that we made these little simple errors from set pieces. Now, to be honest, obviously aside from his defending, I think in open play though, obviously he himself was much better in terms of using the ball better, driving forward, and I think that part of his game was really good, as well as still concentrating on the defending. And I think you could also sort of caveat that for Tomkins as well, and saying actually in open play, I think the pair of them were much better in the second half, as was the rest of the Palace team, because you saw, particularly sort of first 5 minutes or so, we came out all guns blazing from that second half, or from half time into that second half. So, you know, Cahill and Tompkins in particular were players who actually were a lot better in that second half. But like I said, isn't really much more to say about Cahill's performance other than the fact that he fully deserves the 7 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our back four, and that is the left back Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of Van Aanholt's performance, you know, I've given him a 7 because, you know, much like the rest of the defence, he done what he had to do defensively. But the reason I've given him a 7 as opposed to the 6 I gave his fellow fullback Joe Ward on the other side is just that attacking contribution that Van Aanholt made in the game. And, you know, it's something I've talked about quite a lot this season, where he hasn't necessarily been going as far forward as we would normally sort of like to see him, but actually this game is where you got the perfect balance between getting the defensive work right and actually going forward as well, because a lot of the times we were obviously limited to quick counter-attacks when we regain possession. So the fact that you've got someone like Van Aanholt venturing up and down that left hand side, looking to get forward, looking to put balls into the box, looking to obviously take on chances himself, was of course good to see. And, you know, you could say that sometimes he you know, a lot more conservative than expected, but it worked just fine for us. You know, in terms of him getting forward, he was a little bit more conservative, could have done something a bit different, you know, could have at least tried to pull a cross into the box or a shot or a chip into the box, maybe could have tried something, but went for the more safer option. But it still worked fine for us, because the fact that we just had that yardage by people like Van Aanholt obviously linking up with the wingers and actually driving up the flanks, that is obviously enabled us to obviously counter Arsenal as well as he did. And I suppose what you've got to look at is that he done his defensive work fine, and actually going forward he done what he needed to do. You know, you're not always going to expect him to put pinpoint balls into the box, but it would have been a little bit nicer to him to be, I suppose, be a bit more adventurous, because he had all of the good intentions going forward, but if he put a few more crosses into the box, that would have been even better, and we could be looking maybe at an 8 out of 10 performance. But I suppose what you've got to look at, I've given him a 7, and that's just because he done what was needed of him. He was needed to obviously defend deep, make sure people like Aubameyang and Lacazette and Pepe couldn't get the better of us down the flanks. Done exactly that. But of course, maybe offensively, even though we drew the game, you know, if we just countered a bit more, you know, maybe we could have had a few more chances, particularly towards the end of the game. Now, in terms of the negative of his performance, obviously limiting him to that 7. Obviously the first goal, I talked about Hennessy and, you know, him going to the ground and missing the ball because he's obviously got up and the ball's already sort of going towards the net. And obviously Van Aanholt was the player who was actually on that near post, and it seemed like he sort of gave up. Whether it's because it happened it was so quick and he couldn't quite adjust himself in time to obviously get onto that ball, but he seemed to just stand stationary as the ball sort of just gone past him into the goal. So maybe if we'd been a little bit more static and at least just try and stop it, you know, even if you don't end up blocking it, at least sort of move your leg or move at least a part of your body, obviously not giving away a handball, but just move a part of your body to at least show you're not giving up on it. Because for me, looking back at the replays, watching the game, it's just like he sort of stood there, albeit it was just bad collectively from the defence. Him in particular really should have been doing better. And of course, what you've got to look at is the second goal as well. A little bit of blame on him there. Once again, a little bit static on the line. Should have been doing better there. And I think otherwise, defensively, he was decent. And I suppose looking at the second goal as well, again, you know, he played David Luiz onside, so another sort of negative there. And that's why I've given him that 7 as opposed to an 8. And that's just because his defensive play on the whole, aside from these little 2 sort of static mistakes he made with the 2 goals we conceded, aside from that, he was very good defensively and just as good offensively. But, you know, these little mistakes here could have cost us in the game, albeit we wouldn't expect to beat Arsenal. But, you know, at least we came away with a point, and it could have been even better if we hadn't have had these little mistakes so early on in the game. But once again, other than the mistakes and his obviously offensive work as well, which was really good, you know, these 2 things, you know, otherwise defensively he's decent and the offensive work is why I think he deserves the 7 I've given him. So now I'm going to move on to the first player in our midfield, and that is the captain, Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of obviously the first thing to talk about in his performance, you know, as usual, we know how good he is from the penalty spot. But this was yet another penalty that he scored. Obviously, just improving his record, you know, penalty after penalty, in terms of just basically being the most clinical penalty taker in the Premier League. Obviously, I talked earlier on about the VAR decision. Obviously, Zaha's run through on goal. Chambers has quite clearly put his leg out, and, you know, from the referee's position, it's, you know, really obvious that is a penalty to give, but instead he books Zaha, but then VAR gets involved and said actually it is a penalty, and obviously the yellow card was rescinded. And of course Luka Milivojevic, as ever, stays cool, steps up and obviously scores it. Now the thing I found quite funny, and I think Chris Grierson of Palace TV actually came out and said this on Twitter after the game, you know, obviously that Milivojevic penalty video came out the other day with all different sort of camera angles of all different moments of Luka actually taking the penalty, but he's also saving the penalty, he's also in the crowd, and he's also the referee blowing the whistle. So really good editing there. And obviously in that video he obviously scored the penalty in the same place where he hit the Arsenal one. So obviously they were dreading actually him missing that penalty if he goes the same way as that video, and luckily for us he did go the same way as the video, and obviously the goalkeeper went the wrong way. So obviously a little bit of a funny side to the penalty there, but I thought nonetheless I might as well put that in there. But you know, in terms of obviously us getting back into the game, it was really crucial to us actually to get the goal, because of course being 2-0 down so early on in the game, obviously it could have been a bloodbath. You know, Arsenal could have run riot like they did a few seasons ago where we lost 4-1, but instead obviously we had that chance in the first half from that spot kick, and it sort of obviously got us back into the game, but put us back on track in terms of playing a little bit better in the game and going back to our normal selves. And I suppose you've obviously got to look at Luka and go, obviously scoring the penalty is really important to that, but also his midfield performance in terms of he was spraying balls from the centre of the midfield, sort of 20-30 yard passes to people like Zaha and people like Townsend on the wings. He was obviously looking to really dominate that midfield battle. So it wasn't just the penalty he scored which obviously helped us to get back on track and sort of swing that momentum in our favour, particularly in the second half, in terms of we got back into the game, but then we were putting on the pressure on Arsenal. It was obviously down to us getting back into the game with the goal, but also because of people like Luka actually stepping up in the midfield and obviously, you know, making a real telling impact in terms of that midfield battle. Now, of course, like I said, other than that goal he scored, he really kept us organised on the pitch. And, you know, people have criticised him quite a lot this season, saying, oh, you know, maybe he should be dropped, maybe they should change the captaincy from him. But actually, this was a game where it was a prime example. You know, we can use him for his penalty skills, we can use him for his captain skills, and obviously that midfield organisation that he brings as well. So whilst people recently have been calling for him to be dropped, I said, you know, just give him a few more games, get back to his old self after his suspension, and he's done exactly that. Come into this game here and really sort of dominated that midfield performance. But I suppose the final thing really for me, and this is one of the key reasons I've given him a 7, is because yes, he had a good performance and he has loads of good performances, but he normally gets booked, whereas in this game he didn't actually get booked. So that's a real positive from his performances, in the fact that he was still able to be his battling self in terms of making challenges, making life really difficult for the opposition, but he didn't get booked. And considering he's already been suspended for 5 yellow cards this season, we obviously don't want to hit him to hit that sort of 10 yellow card bracket anytime soon. So it was nice to see him actually still put in a really sort of solid defensive performance without him getting booked. But like I've said already, fully deserving of the 7 I've given him, obviously for stepping up, getting that penalty to get us back into the game, but just his overall midfield play, because that really was quite crucial in us, obviously, in terms of regrouping and getting back on track and, you know, going forth to obviously go on and draw the game. But like I said here, Luka Milivojevic, the captain, good performance from him. So I'm now going to move on to his midfield partner, and that is Kouyaté, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, in terms of Kouyaté's performance in midfield, you know, I can't really fault him too much for what he did, but unlike someone like Luka, who I can say, you know, there were loads of key things he'd done in the game which were really impressive, Kouyaté was a complete opposite. And, you know, there wasn't anything spectacular from his game, but he just went about his business. So I suppose much like Joe Ward, weren't spectacular, but done what he had to do. Now, in terms of his performance here, you know, he wasn't outstanding as he has been in recent weeks in terms of, you know, using his physicality, using that pace and that height that he's got. Normally he uses that really well, whereas in this game he wasn't that outstanding, but he just fulfilled his purpose perfectly well. And what that was is obviously sitting deep in midfield, absorbing the pressure that obviously Arsenal were throwing at us, and of course also being that link between the midfield and the attack. So that part of his game he fulfilled. He done that really important role really well. He just wasn't excellent in it. So he done it to a good enough standard, but there weren't any sort of excellent moments in the game that we would have seen. Now, in terms of positives from his performance, because of course he wasn't at his normal level, at his normal best, but the fact that he won possession for us on quite a number of occasions, or, you know, once the opposition had possession, you know, Kouyaté was the guy who actually made these runs and was able to put pressure on the opposition. So whilst his game may not have been at his best, when the opposition was still, when they had possession, he was still putting pressure on them. So he was still doing the right things, not to say the same standards or same levels that he normally would do. Now, of course, he's not one of the fastest players, but that physicality allows him to drive forward. And actually, when we were counter-attacking, you know, he was one of these players who allowed us to go upfield really quickly and allowed him to, or allowed the rest of the team really to keep up with the pace of the game, because he was able to transition from playing very deep to playing as high as possible. So, you know, there are good parts of his game here to talk about. It's just the fact that he didn't execute what he'd done in the game in terms of that pressure, in terms of that driving, in terms of that relieving pressure by getting the ball back. You know, he didn't do that to the same high level that we've seen in recent weeks. But that's not to say he had a bad performance, because obviously he was one of the key players in terms of keeping the midfield solid, restricting Arsenal, which obviously allowed us and gave us that foundations once we conceded the 2 goals to obviously go on and get the draw in a game. So once again here, Cheku Kouyaté, not the best, not the worst performance. I think a 6 is a fair reflection. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our midfield, and that is of course James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, McArthur was one of these players who actually in the first half was fairly quiet, and obviously that was down to sort of that lack of confidence, or that sort of sucker punch blow of obviously conceding them 2 early goals. And understandably, some players' performances can drop, and you know, that's what we saw with McArthur, because his first half he was fairly quiet, wasn't really looking to get involved in the midfield, and it was all down to people like Luka and Kouyaté just doing that work in midfield. But what he did show, his, you know, after that second half, his whole sort of performance was completely turned around. He was looking to get involved, was looking to be that driving force, and obviously because Luka and Kouyaté were sitting deep, it gave McArthur that freedom to go further forward. So loads of times he was up and down that left-hand flank and playing central as well. And obviously the greatest example of that is obviously the assist that he got for Ayew's equaliser. Now, of course, he showed that great sort of intelligence to obviously make that run in front of Wilf, to be on the overlap, win the ball back from him, then obviously dribble into the box and put a fantastic sort of curling cross into the box. Obviously, it's a very difficult position, you know, from literally from the byline, but he managed to sort of curve it just in, so just the right position for the on-rushing Ayew to obviously head home. So obviously, whilst his first half was quiet, his second half was a lot better, and that was really epitomised with the assist he got, because like I've said, obviously the run, the overlap to get on the ball from Zaha was good, but also just running to the byline and putting that curling cross in right onto the head of Ayew was really, really impressive. And of course the header from Ayew was also as equally impressive to obviously get us level in the game. But you know, the build-up work from the rest of the team was also really good. Now, of course, in terms of Granit Xhaka, obviously there lots of controversy surrounding him from the Arsenal side, but obviously McArthur was one of the players who his main job was to keep him quiet. And to be honest, you've got to look at it and go, McArthur, quite a lot of the time, because he obviously was playing on that left hand side, as we saw with the assist, he was obviously sort of standing up or playing against Granit Xhaka, and quite a number of times he actually evaded him in terms of getting past him, getting the better off of him. And obviously we know why Xhaka was obviously annoyed, obviously because of the booing and obviously the reception he got from the fans. But equally, he can't have been very happy with the fact that James McArthur, who obviously isn't a winger but was playing on the left hand side throughout the game, was obviously getting past him and evading him quite a number of times. And you know, it was almost as if McArthur was one of our recognised strikers or recognised wingers in the game, because he obviously found himself quite often playing on that left hand side. But you've got to look at it and go, especially for the assist in particular, you know, McArthur quite easily got past Xhaka, put the ball into the box, and it was basically on a plate for Ayew. You know, I don't think he could have put an even better cross in, because that was exactly perfect from McArthur. But like I've said, you know, fully deserving of the 7 I've given him, obviously for his overall midfield performance in that second half, by obviously getting involved, looking to drive down that left hand side. But for me, then the main impressive thing was the assist that he obviously gave to Jordan Ayew, you know, getting past the right back Granit Xhaka, putting the ball into the box, obviously putting it in perfect position for Jordan Ayew. And like I've said, aside from that poor first half, he was by far one of our best players in the second half, and obviously crucial to us, obviously, well, integral to really for us getting the equaliser, because he was directly involved with it. And like I said, if it wasn't for that great cross, we probably wouldn't have scored that equaliser. So once again, goes to show that when McArthur isn't obviously deployed in a more deeper role, if you give him that freedom to play slightly further forward, whether that be drifting on the left, drifting down the centre, or drifting down the right, when you give him that freedom, he can obviously, you know, obviously get chances for himself, but also become a really good provider. And that's what we saw with that assist for Jordan Ayew's goal. So once again here, James McArthur, fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our front three, and that is Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, of course, Townsend was one of the changes Hodgson made in the game, obviously with Jeffrey Slupp coming off the starting 11, obviously going onto the bench. And of course, Andros came in his place, and I've given him a 6 because he'd done a fairly decent job. And obviously, he didn't necessarily do anything fantastic in the game, but compared to Jeffrey Slupp's recent performances, he was slightly better, because obviously Slupp's performances have slightly decreased recently. So even though Townsend wasn't fantastic in this game, he came in and sort of just upped the level on that left hand side or right hand side, whichever he was playing throughout the game. Obviously changing positions with Zaha, but wherever he was, he sort of just upped that performance, the performance level from what we've seen previously with Slupp in the recent weeks. Now, obviously, I've given him a 6 overall because I think he performed well. He done what he had to do, and even though, well, he found himself loads of opportunities really to obviously get in behind the Arsenal back four. Had loads of chances to get forward. But he just couldn't get that final ball right, because loads of times he found himself in good positions, whether that be on the left or the right, and obviously he's gone to cross the ball in and it's either gone out or it hasn't reached the right player, or the goalkeeper's easily caught it. So whilst he was performing well, he had the right intentions, was obviously being really evasive in terms of getting in behind the Arsenal defence. Yes, that was the case, and he was fairly effective at doing that, but it was just the final product that comes after that was slightly missing from his game. Because if he got that final ball right, even though we may not have scored from it, it would have put the defence under a little bit more pressure, because it wouldn't have just been an easy catch for Leno in goal. It would have been, okay, this ball's going to cause the back four to maybe struggle, to maybe mess around, or completely miss the ball, and maybe you put them under pressure like that. But because he couldn't quite get that right, that was just something that was a little bit missing from his game. But obviously, other than that, it was a decent outing. There wasn't anything spectacular in the game, but like I've said, in comparison to Jeffrey Slupp's performances playing on the left hand side recently, I think obviously Townsend's was a step up. And whilst he may not have been the best, and obviously he was poor with the final ball, you've still got to look at it and go, against a team like Arsenal, you're always going to find it difficult. So if you're at least going to try and have that intent to create chances, that was of course great to see. So whilst he was poor with the ball and all of the crosses were, well, most of them were going into the goalkeeper's hands, a few went out and a few just evaded all Palace players altogether. Whilst that was the case, just having that intent in the first place is what I want to give him credit for. So whilst it may not have been the best performance, I do think he does deserve the 6 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the striker in our front three, and that is Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, of course, obviously last weekend I said about Ayew, he worked hard, but he weren't necessarily that great. Whereas this performance here, this was exactly what you wanted from him. Against the quality of the opposition of Arsenal, you don't always expect your strikers to score, because it's going to be difficult, because of course the quality they've got in defence. But the fact that Jordan Ayew made up for his performance last weekend with a real good performance here, good hard working performance, was great to see. Because last weekend, he may not have had that much impact, but he had that hard working ethic. So the fact that he brought the hard working ethic into this game, upped it a little bit, but also had a little bit more contribution, a little bit more involvement, was of course good to see. Now, obviously, you're looking at throughout the match, particularly in the first half, he may not have been a danger as much as we would have liked him to, but he showed up when we needed him most. And that's what's really key for me, is that if you've got a player who isn't really going to be a danger in attacking positions, but when that one chance does come for them, they obviously take it and score from it, that more than makes up for it. So that was exactly the case with Ayew here, because yes, he was working hard throughout the whole game, but he wasn't much danger. But when that one chance fell to him inside the box, he was well positioned, put his pinpoint header into the goal, got on the end of the cross, and obviously scored from that. And it was a really well taken goal, obviously in terms of the build-up play, but obviously the cross was great, but obviously the header from Ayew as well, in terms of literally no one was marking him. A free header, directed it past the goalkeeper and the few players that were on the line. And really, realistically, he obviously had a hard-fought performance himself, but actually that goal obviously brought it level and allowed us to get that hard-earned or well-fought point. Because of course, before that point, obviously Arsenal had a few chances and Hennessy had to make a few saves, and of course it was really crucial to us to actually get that goal, because it was a really good performance from us, particularly in the second half. So we finally got something to show for that effort, and it was nice to see actually someone like Ayew, who was putting in loads of effort, he finally got something for the team which showed that we were all putting effort in the game. Now, obviously, whilst it may not have been much danger in the game, the fact that he was running all the time, getting away from the Arsenal defenders, obviously causing them problems with that high pressure he was doing, that was obviously really great to see. And, you know, that's really key when you're playing against teams like Arsenal, like your Man City last weekend. You need to put them on pressure, make them make mistakes at the back, and that's where you can capitalise on. And whilst he may not have been a danger in that aspect, the fact that he just worked hard, was chasing them down, getting into good positions, as well as just scoring the great goal that he did, is obviously why I've given him that 7 overall. So once again here, Jordan Ayew, fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. Obviously moving on now to the final player in our starting 11, and that is of course the winger Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now obviously in terms of our attacking play, obviously this is inevitable with him being our talisman, but he was very much a driving force between all of our attacks. You know, yes, he may have started slowly in the game, and much like many players in the team, you know, Andros in particular on the other side, you know, started the game quite slowly, but the fact that he eventually grew into the game really sort of was epitomised with his second half performance, because whenever we were hitting them on the counter attack, and that was obviously a lot more often in that second half than it was in the first half, whenever we were doing that, you know, Zaha was the pinnacle of that. He was constantly causing problems for them, running at them, and I think also you've got to look at that one moment in the first half with the penalty, and that really just showed how much of the driving force he was, because of course he made a fantastic run into the box, and of course the only way Chambers was going to stop him from getting to the byline and putting the ball into the into the penalty area or in front of the goal face was by obviously tripping him up. And that just goes to show he's so much of a driving force that he was going to get past him, and of course the only way to stop him was of course to get a foul, and of course, you know, that Chambers gave away to win the penalty. So the fact that he obviously started the game a bit slowly but eventually grew into it was good to see, because that's what you want from players. You know, the whole team was disappointed from being 2 goals down within 10 minutes. So the fact that we picked ourselves up again, and obviously Zaha in particular was able to still constantly attack Arsenal. Even though we're 2-0 down, you could have lost all faith, we've lost this game anyway. So the fact that we just kept going, kept doing what we had to do to obviously have a go at Arsenal was of course great to see. Now, of course, Arsenal, you know, obviously they tried to sign him in the summer, you know, we know all of that. We're not going to spend too much time on that. But of course, you know, obviously poking a bit of fun at him, you know, with the taunts and chants and all this stuff out of it. He is the guy who had the last laugh, because at the end of the day, they're obviously laughing at him, thinking, oh, you've got a yellow card, you're diving. But actually, VAR overturned it, obviously, as we said, because obviously Callum Chambers obviously tripped him up, and obviously he won the penalty off the back of that. So, of course, he shut the Arsenal fans up in terms of that. And, you know, you've just got to look on Twitter, and people go, oh, Zaha's a diver, blah, 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 he's been booked again, simulation, ha, ha, ha. And then you look back at VAR, and it's like, that's a clear penalty. And it just goes to show that Zaha isn't a diver. You know, he's just so tricky to deal with that, you know, the only way Chambers was going to stop him from getting any more danger was of course by tackling him, and of course that led to us conceding the penalty. So that is when VAR is good. Obviously we could talk all day about the goal that Arsenal got disallowed, and I don't really want to dwell on it, that's why I really haven't mentioned it already. But you know, in terms of that is what we've been calling for years, you know, actually VAR should be used for situations like that, because that was a clear and obvious mistake by the referee, because Zaha's literally going to run through a goal and he sticks his leg out, and it's not just like he tripped over his leg or he ran into it. You can see on the video that Chambers' leg sort of drifts out as Zaha's running past him. So, you know, in that aspect, VAR was used quite efficiently, but obviously lots of debate can be had about the goal that Arsenal had, obviously later on in the game, to obviously, which could have made it 3-2. Now, of course, there was one chance in particular that Zaha had, obviously, to win it for Palace. You know, a really good chance to settle the game late on. Couldn't convert it, went just wide of the post. But once again, it was nice to see him. You know, even though before the game I would have been, you know, happy not to lose the game 2-3-0. So the fact that we managed to draw the game and we had a chance to actually win the game late in the game with Zaha having that chance really just sums up his performance, because throughout the whole game he was having chances, doing all the right things, and then there's one time that he gets a chance, he's so unlucky at the fact that he just goes inches wide rather than going in. And certainly the celebrations would have been 10 times, 100 times more better if we had ended up scoring in the last few minutes or so. But like I've said, you know, in terms of his overall performance and why I've given him an 8, obviously it's because he won the penalty, so he's got the assist there, but just the turns of skill that he showed throughout the game, not only to win the penalty but throughout the game in terms of just causing problems for the Arsenal back four. The fact that there were other times where he wasn't necessarily the main focus of that certain attack, but he was the guy who was looking to get the ball into the box and looking to put these crosses across the floor. And there was one in particular where he made it into the box, or his cross made it into the box, and there was no players waiting. And you know, had it made it into the box, well, I think there was one chance that there were players waiting, maybe could have done better there in terms of getting it in. But then likewise there was another one which went into the box and no one was there. So not only was he being that attacking influence by obviously being that focal point, running at players and causing them to give away fouls, but also in terms of, you know, having that chance to create for other people, he was doing that as well, albeit nothing came off the back of it. And of course, you know, the final point really for me, obviously I could talk all day about his performance because I've given him an 8 and because it was so good, but of course that tackle by Guendouzi right at the end of the game, you know, in rugby that would have been classed as a high tackle. So the fact that in a Premier League game that's not given as a red card, obviously I can understand it, it's sort of the end of the game. Is it really a clear and obvious goal scoring opportunity? Maybe, because Zaha's going to run through, and you know, Guendouzi was almost the last man. I'm not quite sure if he was, because of course the camera angle doesn't quite show it. But then likewise, because Zaha's already sort of booted the ball away and tried to run around him, and of course Guendouzi just pulled him down, you've got to also look at that and go, actually, you know, because Zaha's not with the ball, that's why it was only given as a yellow card. But whatever happens, that was a really bad challenge. Some people are going, oh, look at that, that's what you want from, you know, that's what you would expect from someone like Xhaka, the captain. You'd expect them to make a really harsh challenge like that. But, you know, in rugby, that would have been given as a high tackle possibly. So the fact that Guendouzi literally just grabbed him and literally poured him to the ground rather than just making a nice clean tackle, obviously could have debated it being a red card. But for me, you know, at the end of the day, literally towards the end of the game, not necessarily a clear and obvious sort of goal scoring opportunity. So I think on the balance of it, I do think the yellow card overall is a fair result. But like I've said, you know, with all these things happening, the amount of chances that Zaha had throughout the game, that is why players like Guendouzi had to resort to making these challenges, because that was the only way that they obviously were going to deal with Zaha. But once again, I do think he does deserve the 8 I've given him. So in terms of the two substitutions we made in the game, obviously Christian Benteke came on for Jordan Ayew, and of course James McCarthy came on sort of towards the end of the game. Now, in terms of Benteke's performance, I've given him a 6, because much like his performance last weekend, where of course he came on and his first touch was a header, which of course was fantastically saved by Edison, this was another game here where he obviously had a chance late on in the game to obviously put us ahead, put us back in, or not put us back into the league, but put us ahead in the game for the first time. And of course, whilst that flick header obviously fell to Zaha in the box, and yes, Zaha, or from that resulting shot, obviously Zaha's thing was deflected wide. Yes, that was the case, but it was nice to see Benteke actually come off the bench again and actually have that influence, and that's why I've given him a 6 overall, because much like last weekend, he was obviously unlucky with that header. This was another game here where he obviously got into a good position, flicked the header onto Zaha inside the box, and of course that shot from him obviously was deflected wide. Now, other than that, he didn't necessarily do too much in the game, but this was sort of once again a performance in the right direction, in the fact that he's coming off the bench, and whereas before he was completely anonymous, not really getting involved, at least now we're starting to see a few chances from set pieces, from balls into the box, where actually he's starting to get back to himself. Still not brilliant, and still has got terrible goal scoring record in the last 3 seasons or so, but it's nice to see a few parts of his game, his good aspects of his game coming back. But like I've said, you know, really good header, flicked on header to Zaha, and unluckily for us, he obviously couldn't convert it. And of course, James McCarthy, not really going to give him a rating because he wasn't really long enough on the pitch to make an impact, so I can't really rate him there. But it's nice to see we've got players who we of course can bring off the bench just to help us see the game out. And in particular in the midfield, it's really good that we've got someone like McCarthy who's very combative, very physical, who of course that we can use them sort of attributes to help us in the game. Now, to be honest, what you've got to look at, you know, a small summary of the game, you know, you've got to look at our first half performance, and in particular first 10 minutes, and go, actually, aside from that, we played really well, because after that horror start, conceding 2 early goals, it was actually a really, really good point, because we were able to overcome that, get back into the game, and obviously hold on to the lead as well. And yes, of course, man of the match, you're going to be looking at it and go, actually, VAR obviously is man of the match because it saved us on 2 occasions. But also, you just got to look at our performance, because whilst we started the game poorly, particularly in that second half and the beginning of that second half, we came out all guns blazing and we were trying to correct the mistakes by just putting in a really, really solid performance. And that's what you've got to consider, because for the most part, for 80 minutes or so, we actually played pretty well. And that's just because we put that horror start behind us. And actually, you know, we got a fully deserving, very good point overall. And, you know, you could be saying, you know, we got lucky with the goal being disallowed. Obviously, I'm not going to dwell too much on it. But what VAR have said, and if you've watched Match of the Day, you would have seen it. Because, obviously, Chambers tackled Milivojevic and he went down to ground, that obviously impeded his ability to clear the ball. And, obviously, because Luka was going down Chambers was able to get a little touch on the ball to put it through to whoever else it was in the box, who then passed it to Sokratis to score. So yes, obviously Luka had his feet taken away from him and went down to ground, but I don't know, I don't think in a VAR, if we didn't have VAR, that obviously would have stood. But then with VAR, I think they've just been very tedious in the fact that, oh, you know, Luka's gone to ground, so he can't clear the ball, so therefore he's been fouled and it doesn't count. So obviously we've seen more clear and obvious errors in the game, but at the end of the day, I'm not moaning. It's one extra point in the game where I would have been happy just to not get embarrassed in terms of a defeat. So it was nice to see us actually, you know, play as well as we did, get lucky with the VAR, but also, you know, come back from that terrible start, and that's a really good thing for me. Now, of course, it's a great point, like I've already said, and I think other than set pieces, particularly when we were defending them, obviously attacking set pieces we weren't great either, but from defending them in particular, we weren't great in the game, and that could have been that was our greatest weakness, but it could have been even worse because Arsenal, particularly towards the end of the game, had corner after corner after corner. So we seemed to learn eventually from our mistakes in that first 10 minutes or so. But nevertheless, you know, I've got to say, I can't complain. You know, VAR, man of the match, thanks to that. Technology is obviously one of the reasons why we obviously drew the game, but also just our good performance overall. So I do think, on the reflection, I do think the 2-2 is a fair result. As much as Arsenal fans want to argue and talk about it, you know, they let a 2-goal lead slip away and draw 2-2. So whilst you could look at it and go VAR was all down to that, actually it's also down to Arsenal just being sloppy and giving away that lead it had. So of course, going on to next weekend, big game against Leicester, obviously 1-9-0 on Friday night last week. So that's going to be a really great game. You know, you've got third place team against the sixth place team. Obviously, who knows whether Leicester and Palace will be up here come the end of the season, but it's going to be a good match. You know, normally we do really, really well against Leicester, but this season I think it's going to be a little bit different. They're obviously under Rodgers now. They're fully sort of developed his style, so it's going to be a really good game. So of course, we'll see what happens next weekend. So I'm now going to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and why I thought the biggest influence on the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, in terms of the performance being as good as it was, you know, bar the first 10 minutes or so, it was actually quite difficult to narrow it down to 4 players in particular who I thought stood out for me, and that's just because across the field, you know, in defence, in midfield and attack, and obviously in the goalkeeper department as well, obviously everyone done their bit to obviously contain Arsenal, obviously once it was 2-0, obviously just making sure that we didn't concede anymore, and of course once we got back into the game, making sure we could hold on to that. So across the field, you know, players need to be given credit, and rightly so, but the 4 players I've picked out for me are just a reflection of different areas of the field and obviously different types of contribution they made throughout the game. So I've gone with Patrick Van Aanholt, James McArthur, Jordan Ayew and Wilfried Zaha. So of course, if you do disagree with me or you think I've missed someone out, obviously feel free to comment that below. But in terms of Van Aanholt's performance, I think, you know, even though his defensive work was really good, I was just as impressed with his offensive work. You know, he found himself venturing up and down that left-hand side so many times throughout the game. Yes, he could have been a little bit better in terms of maybe being a bit more creative, but the fact that he had that intent in the first place is why I've put him there, because a team like Arsenal, you're not going to have much possession, so you need to make the most of every attack and every ability really you have to counter-attack as possible, and I think Van Aanholt done a fairly decent job of that, and you know, he done what was needed off of him defensively, and that allowed him to go forward and obviously be that contribution there. Now in terms of McArthur, obviously I could have picked all 3 of the midfield players really, but for me McArthur stood out, and obviously it's because of his hard-working performance, you know, how he was obviously basically the best player in the second half in terms of just that contribution, that sheer sort of energy he brought into the side. But it's mainly because of that assist for Jordan Ayew. Fantastic whipped cross from the byline into Jordan Ayew to score the equaliser. And obviously, whilst his midfield performance was good enough to obviously get on the shortlist, for that alone is why I've put him on there ahead of people like Milivojevic and Kiyate, because of just how good the cross was. Obviously the build-up play was good, but how good the cross was in terms of getting it to Jordan Ayew to score. And of course, moving on swiftly to Jordan Ayew, obviously the 3rd player on the list. Obviously he worked hard throughout the game, was constantly running, constantly putting pressure on Arsenal, and whilst other than the goal there wasn't much to talk about with his performance, the fact that he got the all-important goal with a great run into the box, great header, and connection on the end of MacArthur's cross, as well as just, for the rest of the game, just causing issues for the Arsenal defence by putting pressure on them, is why I was impressed with Jordan Ayew. And of course, Wilfried Zaha, man in the moment, obviously was very much our driving force of most of our attacks, was allowing us to play further up the pitch, allowing us to make good use of the limited counter-attacks we had by obviously driving forward. And maybe, yes, he started the game quite slowly, but the fact that when he got going, he was at his best, causing problems for them, as well as the fact that he won the penalty for us. I'm not sure what 100% if that's going to count as an assist, but in terms of fantasy football, it counts as an assist. So once again, he was that driving force, winning that penalty for us, but also just being that contribution throughout the game. Now, like I said at the beginning, I could have given this award to anyone really for me, but there's one player that stood out for me, and he may not have got the highest rating when it came to the player ratings, but for me, Jordan Ayew is going to win this week's Man of the Match award. So congratulations, Jordan. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was yet another solid performance from you. Now, obviously, it was, for me personally at least, it was between him and Zaha in terms of who was going to win it. And for me, even though I gave Ayew a lower rating, just the fact that he got that important goal for Palace, which obviously allowed us to equalise in the game, is why I've given it to him. Because of course, maybe Zaha's overall performance was good, but the fact that Ayew was in the right place at the right time, able to convert it as well as he did, is obviously why I've put him forward for the award. Obviously, feel free to disagree and comment below if you have a different opinion, if you think I've missed someone out. But I think on reflection, obviously Vanana, MacArthur, Ayew and Zaha already, in my opinion, do deserve a little bit more credit than the others. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Jordan Ayew and Luka Milivojevic following the game.
Another goal, and a crucial goal for your team. Just give me your thoughts on what was an eventful game and, of course, the point.
Well, I think we reacted really well after the 2 goals conceded. So that was a positive thing, and I think it gave us confidence. And after we got the penalty, that gave us more confidence, and luckily we got a chance to equalize. So I think in our overall performance, it was a good game. And I think we could have gotten the 3 points. They could have gotten the 3 points. So 1 point is a fair result. So we're happy.
We talk about character a lot with Crystal Palace, but at that moment that you got that penalty, obviously overturned by VAR to get it, how much confidence did you take from that moment? How much did that change the tide of the game?
Well, obviously, it gave us a lot of confidence. And I think the positive thing is that we reacted really, really well after conceding these 2 early goals, and I think that was a positive thing. So I think we're in the right direction. We need to continue like this.
For you personally, 4 goals for the season. Now you're in a bit of an impressive vein of form at the minute.
Well, I just try to do my best each game and try to work hard for the team. And luckily these days things are going my way, and I just need to thank God and continue working hard.
And finally, Palace are still in 6th. You've come here and taken a point off another big side. What realistically can you achieve this season?
The most important thing for us to get to the 40 points as soon as possible, and after we'll see where we can get to.
The team showed incredible fight to come back after 2 goals, didn't they?
Yeah, I think it was very hard after 5-6 minutes, 2-0 down in their home, where they are very strong normally. And I think the reaction of the whole team after 2-0 was great. We didn't give up. We tried to create. We had penalty. We come back to 1, and then we come back to the game. We had second half. We start very well. We score second goal, and if you see, we had one very, very good chance of Wilfried in last minute. But as well, they had some chances. In the end, we can say both teams deserve point, and we are pleased after all what happened tonight. We are happy with point.
It's a crazy game to watch. What was it like playing in a game like that? It was so energetic.
Yeah, when one team, any team, score after 5-6 minutes 2 goals, the game become open straight, because we all start with passion, with control. But when you concede 2 goals, and we concede first time this season, I think, from the corners, the goals, and the game become open. We have to start to risk, which is not easy after 6 minutes on this stadium to start to risk, because you have 85 minutes more to play. But I think, as I said, the reaction of the team was great. Character was there, and in the end, we deserved 3 points for 1 point.
And Wilf did some great defensive work with his attacking work today. How did you rate his performance?
I cannot say Wilfred did. Everyone did. Everyone did. Andros did amazing job on the right side. Wilfred did amazing job on the left side. Jordan chased 3 people in last 10-15 minutes of the second half. Defenders did their job. Fullbacks were on their positions, and we in middle, I think as well, we did our job. That's something what earn you points. We need to be very solid in defending wise, and as well we have a lot of qualities up front. And when we work all together as a team, as we did from beginning of this season, that's why we are high on the table. And that's the way, we have to work all together, and that's it. There is nothing more to say, and we have to continue like that.
Entertaining game to watch. Are you and the team happy with a point?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're playing at Arsenal. We're playing against one of the top teams in the country, one of the top teams in the world, and we found ourselves 2-0 down within 10 minutes from 2 corner kicks, which is unlike us to concede from corner kicks, but we did, and they certainly were flying at that moment in time with their tails between their legs, and the thought of 2-2 at that time seemed to be a very remote thought. It seemed to be way beyond our capabilities, but we put that right. It wasn't beyond our capabilities. We fought well to get back into the game and bring it to 2-1, so it was all to play for still in the second half, and the equaliser was an excellent goal. And I thought that, really, if Wilf had been allowed to go 1v1 with the goalkeeper, we might even be sitting here celebrating another famous victory. But I'm not unhappy with the 2-2. I think that's a very good result away from home against any team in the Premier League, and to get 2-2 away from home against an Arsenal with the firepower they have and the talent they have in their team is even more commendable. So very, very proud of the players, very, very happy for the point, and it's a point which of course keeps our noses in front in the 6th position, which we're also very proud of.
And it says a lot about the desire within this squad, doesn't it, to come back from those 2 early goals?
It does, absolutely. It was a lot of character out there today, because we could so easily have capitulated at 2-0 with them pressurising and flying around the field. They've got some good athletes, so they weren't giving us much time on the ball to fight our way into a situation where we did get some time on the ball, did get a chance to show some composure and pass the ball around. That in itself was worthy, I think, of comment. And then to come out in the second half and not only keep ourselves in the game, but to level it up. Very, very happy with it. I think it was a good performance all round. Good support as always from a very intrepid group of supporters. 60,000 people here, and we don't get that many allocations. So have to fight very hard to make their voices heard, but they did, which we're pleased about, and I'm very pleased that we've given them something to celebrate, because they understand, Crystal Palace fans, what it's like to come away to Arsenal and get something, because there's been so many times in the past where we haven't.
And Wilf today, you answer a lot of questions about Wilf, but defensively and attacking today, he was incredible, wasn't he?
Yeah, very good. We were worried about him at half time, so I think he got a kick on the calf, but we weren't sure whether it's a kick or whether it's a strain, so we were very worried about him. And with all the games we've got coming up, we don't wish to lose him, but I thought that he showed them today what they missed. The other guy's a good player too, but no doubt Emery will be thinking, I wish I had both of them.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Jordan Ayew and Milivojevic had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Arsenal. But make sure to come out next week from our post-match review of the game against Leicester City. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.